Hey, fellow music fans, welcome back to Psychology of Rock. If you're new here, my name's Nina, and today we are talking about one of the most likable and endearing personalities to ever grace the world of rock, which is, of course, the incredible Daniela of The Warning. She serves as the band's lead singer and guitar player, and by all accounts, she really does seem to be pure sunshine in human form. And although in recent videos I have focused more on Pau and Ale, it truly was Dany that pulled me into the band and made me the diehard fan that I am today. I'm consistently blown away by her vocals. I absolutely love her guitar playing, and I've honestly never encountered a front woman who performs with such warmth, authenticity, and joy. She just radiates this rare blend of charisma, charm, and wholehearted generosity that I think is completely captivating. Now, in a previous video, I assessed Dany's MBTI profile as ESFJ, which I later found out she actually confirmed was accurate when she was talking about her MBTI on a live. But in a nutshell, ESFJ is a warm, organized, and socially attuned personality type that's often called the caregiver, which I think is the absolute perfect name for her. But while the MBTI can give us a useful snapshot of how someone perceives the world and makes decisions, the Big Five allows us to dig much, much deeper, which is why I wanted to reevaluate her through my preferred personality assessment tool, which is the five factor model. It's my favorite because it's widely supported in psychological research and can give us true insight on not just how someone functions socially, but also how they respond to stress, their creative style, how disciplined or impulsive they might be, and just give us a better overall picture of who they are as a person. So let's quickly talk about how this type of assessment works, and then we'll get right into it. Now, this model breaks personality down into five core dimensions, which you can remember through the acronym OCEAN: openness, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And each of these factors is further divided into six specific traits or facets, which give us a more nuanced and scientifically grounded portrait of someone's personality. As always, however, please keep in mind that this personality assessment is purely speculative and based solely on my observations of Dany's public performances, interviews, and social media presence, as I have certainly not assessed her personally through any formal psychological testing. Please also keep in mind that everyone's personality is complex and multifaceted, and public personas may only reveal part of the picture. So, this analysis is intended only to be a respectful and thoughtful exploration of Dany, not a definitive judgment. And with all of that being said, let's take a deeper look into Dany's traits, starting with openness to experience. Now, this trait reflects a person's level of intellectual curiosity, aesthetic sensitivity, imagination, and of course, openness to new experiences and ideas. So let's go through the facets and then we'll talk about her likely overall score. The first facet is fantasy, which reflects a person's capacity for imagination and their tendency to engage with inner worlds and creative possibilities. High scorers are imaginative dreamers, whereas low scorers prefer facts over fantasy. I would say Dany likely scores moderate here. She's obviously extremely creative in music, but she's also very grounded in real world skill and she is extremely disciplined. But next we have aesthetics, and this captures how deeply someone is moved by artistic expression and visual or sensory beauty. High scorers are strongly moved by music and visual arts, whereas low scorers are more indifferent to art. I think it's safe to say that Dany would likely score very high here. Not only does she often talk about how moved she is by music and other artists, her own musical artistry and performances clearly show this as well. I think it's very evident that she's being deeply affected by what she's singing and playing, and also by the passion that we can feel in the songs she writes, like When I'm Alone. Now, next up, we have feelings, which has to do with awareness of one's own emotions and receptiveness to emotional experiences in general. High scorers are emotionally in tune with others, whereas low scorers are a lot less aware or expressive. Now, this is a facet that I think Dany would score incredibly high in. Again, I think we can see this in her expressive performances and her extremely genuine emotional reactions, like when Lizzie Hale gave her the guitar, or when she clearly gets choked up when she talks about what the cost of being in the band has been during the 10-year anniversary video. I think overall she just has a very strong emotional presence. Okay, next up we have actions, which has to do with the willingness to try new activities and the openness to new experiences. High scorers enjoy novelty, whereas low scorers prefer routine. I think Dany would likely score moderate to high here. While touring and experimenting with her stage performance and all her little playful interactions definitely show openness, I do think she seems to have a preference for at least some structure in her life in the rare moments when it's actually possible to have it. Now, the next facet is ideas, which has to do with intellectual curiosity and open mindedness. High scorers are philosophically curious and love abstract thinking, whereas low scorers tend to focus on concrete facts. Now, this one is a little harder to gauge, but I think Dany would likely score moderate here. To me, she seems more practical and emotionally intuitive than deeply abstract or philosophical. But because she really does seem to be reflective in interviews, and we can see that she thinks conceptually about music and meaning, I don't think we could give her a low score, so I would put her more in the middle. Okay, the last facet here is values, which reflects a person's openness to rethinking traditional beliefs and questioning established norms. So, high scorers tend to second guess authority and are open to different perspectives, whereas low scorers deeply respect tradition. Now, I think this is another area where Dany would have a moderate score. On one hand, she is part of a progressive young rock band, but on the other, she shows respect and reverence for her influences, culture, parents, and traditions. I don't see her having a deep need to go against the grain. Again, I think she definitely shows a sense of openness, but I also don't really see evidence of advocating nonconformist ideals, aside of her being a female in the music industry. But overall, I would say that Dany would still score moderately high in the trait of openness to experience, but definitely lower than her sister Pau, who I did an analysis of a few months back. I think it's really interesting seeing how different the sisters actually are, especially because they get along so well and they seem to work so perfectly together. Okay, next we have the trait of conscientiousness, which captures how disciplined, organized, and goal directed someone is. So let's take a look at the six facets. Now, the first is competence, which has to do with belief in one's own self efficacy and the ability to handle situations. So, high scorers usually feel capable and efficient, whereas low scorers often feel unprepared and overwhelmed. Now, I think Dany would score very high here. She has successfully mastered playing guitar and singing and performing live, which she usually has to do all at once. This definitely requires strong self efficacy. But she also just seems really calm when there are mishaps or challenges. In several of Halsey's shows that we've seen recently, there's been a lot of technical issues, and I think she not only handles them gracefully, but she's actually able to make the moment even better for the audience than if they weren't happening. She always thinks of something funny or entertaining to say, and she never looks stressed about it. She always seems very capable and confident, even under a lot of pressure. And what makes it even more impressive is that she's almost understated about it. Also, as the oldest member of the band, I think she almost had to figure out how to handle situations simply because she's the biggest sister and she probably felt a lot of personal responsibility to take care of everyone. And I think this definitely also extends into how well she takes care of the audience. Now, next we have orderliness, which has to do with the preference for organization and structure. High scorers keep things neat and under control, whereas low scorers tend to be more spontaneous and more chaotic. I think this is another facet where Dany would score pretty high. We can see this in everything from her handwriting to her professionalism in performance and her attention to detail. And also in her interviews and lives, when she talks about how she likes to be organized and neat and planned out, she talks a lot about how disciplined she was learning guitar, and she just seems to be a very organized person as a whole, which definitely aligns with this trait. Okay, next up we have dutifulness, which has to do with adherence to ethical principles and a sense of moral obligation. High scores tend to be responsible and dependable, whereas low scores may be a little bit more flexible with rules. Now, I think Dany would score very high in this trait. I think we can see this as almost one of her most defining characteristics. She's extremely thoughtful and respectful and emotionally conscientious, especially towards her family and fans. And like I mentioned earlier, she shows an unwavering sense of responsibility to the group and to her role as the front woman. We're never going to see her not giving 100%, whether her back is hurting or she hasn't slept. Nothing seems to ever keep her from giving everything she has to the audience. Now, the next facet is achievement striving, which reflects a person's drive for personal excellence and motivation to pursue meaningful goals. Individuals who score high in this trait tend to be ambitious, determined, and persistent, whereas low scores are typically less competitive and more accepting of the status quo. Now, even though I think Dany is pretty easygoing, I do think she'd score high here. I think it might be less obvious because I think she needs less external validation for her achievements than others might, but I do think she's still very goal driven. Her intense commitment to her craft and the way she constantly pushes herself really reflects this. Something recent that I think really reveals this trait is the addition of her guitar improvisation section in their performances. I definitely think she wanted to challenge herself and had this personal goal, which has just been such an enjoyable part of the tour. I feel like she's always working to make herself an even better artist, even when it's things that the audience might not immediately pick up on. So I would definitely classify her as having that drive for personal excellence. Okay, the next trait we have is self discipline, which is the ability to stay on track and resist distractions. High scores will persist even when they're bored or frustrated, whereas low scores tend to procrastinate or get sidetracked. This is another trait where I think Dany would score extremely high. Obviously, long hours of practice and constant touring requires this trait, but I really do think she is naturally self-disciplined. She has a strong ability to stay focused and follow through with tasks no matter how long they take. And like the rest of her sisters, she just has this unbelievable work ethic that seems to take priority over pretty much everything else in her life. She definitely seems like someone that you could completely rely on to get something done that needed to get done. And the last trait in this category is deliberation, which is the tendency to think carefully before acting. High scorers are cautious and plan ahead, whereas low scorers tend to be much more impulsive. Once again, I think Dany would likely score very high here. She's animated and she's playful, but she really is also extremely respectful in communication and highly emotionally considerate. This shows to me that she definitely thinks things through before acting or speaking. She always seems prepared and she doesn't seem to have the desire to take any unnecessary risks. I think she tries to avoid making mistakes that could negatively impact other people, and she seems to go into things with at least some form of a plan. So, overall, I think Dany would score very high in conscientiousness, which I really think is a huge asset for the band. I think we can also see this trait a lot in Ale, which is the perfect counterpoint to Pau, who I think would tend to score a little bit lower in this trait. Okay, the next factor is extraversion, which reflects how outgoing, energetic, and socially engaged a person tends to be. So let's go through the facets. First up, we have warmth, which has to do with friendliness and affection towards others. High scorers are genuinely warm and approachable, whereas low scorers tend to seem a little bit more distant. Now, here I think we can all agree that Dany would score incredibly high. Her viewable joy interacting with fans and children and even interviewers literally radiates warmth. And from the second I heard the song, I felt like the lyrics to Automatic Sun fit perfectly with the effect that she has on other people, even those of us who have never even met her in person. I would actually score her pretty close to, if not fully at 100% here, which is almost unheard of, but it really does seem to be the case with Dany. Next, we have gregariousness, which basically gauges the level of enjoyment people have being around others. So, high scorers are going to love social environments and feel very comfortable, whereas low scorers are going to tend to prefer solitude. Now, once again, I think Dany would score very high here. She seems to truly enjoy being around other people and is obviously very outgoing and friendly. She appears genuinely interested in the lives of the people she meets and, of course, her fans. And she definitely seems to prioritize her personal relationships and her connection to others. And I think it's very evident that she's the type of person who just lights up any room that she walks into. She seems to make a conscious effort to make sure that no one feels left out, and she really does naturally make people feel welcome in her presence, whether she's meeting someone one on one or she's talking to a crowd of thousands of people. Now, next up, we have assertiveness, which has to do with confidence in expressing opinions and taking leadership. High scores tend to lead and speak up, whereas low scores tend to defer or hesitate. Now, I think Dany would score moderate, maybe leaning towards moderate to high here. She definitely commands the stage and takes initiative, but I don't see her as being domineering. I think there is definitely balance. I also kind of think that she has this unique skill of being able to effectively speak her mind, but in a way that doesn't hurt or demean other people. So while she is assertive, she also expresses herself in the most thoughtful way possible. And we know that she's also willing to compromise when she sees it as being beneficial for the group. But I don't see her as ever really hiding her feelings or being shy to speak up. I just see her as always genuinely trying to be considerate. Now, the next facet is activity level, which has to do with pace of living and energy output. High scores tend to always be on the move, whereas low scores are more relaxed and slow paced. So here I think Dany would score pretty high, but I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that she really doesn't have a choice being in this career path. I don't know if she would be quite as active if she didn't need to be. I think she probably would actually prefer to have a little bit more downtime, but I also don't see her as really desiring a truly slow paced lifestyle. Even if she wasn't involved with music, I think we would still see her having a lot of energy and enthusiasm for getting out in the world and trying to do all she can. Okay, next up we have excitement seeking, which measures the desire and need for excitement and stimulation. High scorers tend to seek thrills and novelty, whereas low scorers are much more content with calm. So I think Dany would probably have a moderate score here. I think she obviously loves being on stage, but she doesn't seem reckless or seem to pursue danger or chaos. Again, I just kind of think that she's more balanced than that. She's not a homebody, but she doesn't seem to be a thrill seeker either. Out of the three, I think there's no question that it would actually be Pow that would score highest in this facet. And last but not least, here we have positive emotions, which has to do with the frequency of feeling joyful and enthusiastic. High scores tend to be exuberant and cheerful, whereas low scores are going to be much more reserved or even somber. Now, I think clearly Dany would score very high here. Her joy is completely evident in her expressiveness and her playfulness on stage. She's silly and she's animated, and she genuinely seems delighted in even the smallest of things. She's a natural optimist and she just exudes happiness the majority of the time. Now, of course, nobody is happy all of the time, and we've definitely seen her show her more vulnerable side at times. But overall, she really does seem to be one of the most joyful people out there, especially within the entertainment business. So, as a whole, I would say that Dany would score pretty high in extroversion. Maybe not quite as high as some people might assume, because I'm sure she needs some non social time to recuperate, but she is definitely an extrovert. Okay, let's move on to the next trait, which is agreeableness, which measures how cooperative, compassionate, and kind someone is. So let's look at the facets, although you can probably already guess how she's going to score here. The first one is trust, which has to do with the belief in the honesty and good intentions of others. High scorers tend to assume the best about people, whereas low scorers tend to be much more skeptical or even cynical. I think Dany would definitely score very high here. She really seems to believe in people, and she says if she wasn't a musician, she would be a teacher. So I think that alone shows that she holds this foundational optimism about the potential of people. I think her warmth in interviews and her playful interactions with fans, and just the way she always lights up around children and does things like give them her guitar picks, all point to someone who approaches others with goodwill and faith in their sincerity. I don't think she's overly naive where she would just blindly trust people in serious situations, but she really doesn't come across as being guarded or suspicious. It's more like she's someone who sees the best in others until she's given a reason not to. Now, the next facet is straightforwardness, which has to do with sincerity and honesty in communication. High scores tend to be more open and direct, saying what they mean with little pretense, whereas low scores may be more strategic, tactful, or filtered in how they express themselves. They tend to choose their words carefully or hold back from fully saying how they feel. So I would probably place Dany somewhere between moderate to high for this. She absolutely comes across as someone who speaks with intention. She's clear and she's genuine. She always comes across as being extremely sincere, but she's definitely not confrontational. So I think while she doesn't seem to hide behind a persona or pretend to be anyone but herself, she also doesn't bulldoze people with her opinions or say anything that isn't phrased in the kindest way possible. Okay, the next facet is altruism, which has to do with the willingness to help and support others. High scorers are selfless and generous, whereas low scorers tend to focus much more on their own needs. Now, without question, Dany would score very, very high here. We can see that it's a priority for her to try to uplift others and take care of them. She's very comfortable sharing the spotlight. She never tries to make any situation about her. And she's clearly incredibly generous in spirit. In interviews and in all of the behind the scenes footage, we can see that she's empathetic and compassionate. Whereas most people in her place would probably be a lot more self centered and even egotistical. We literally see none of this behavior in her. Now, next up is compliance, which has to do with the willingness to cooperate and avoid conflict. High scorers are conflict averse and accommodating, whereas low scorers are much more confrontational. Once again, I think Dany would score very high here. As we've talked about a few times, she's extremely respectful and she tries not to hurt other people's feelings. She's highly cooperative when it comes to the band, as well as in her other professional and personal relationships. And I just kind of see her as the peace seeker in the group. I mean, I don't think there's ever tremendous conflict, but she does kind of seem to operate as the one trying to find solutions and common ground. Now, the next trait is modesty, which has to do with humility and lack of arrogance. High scorers will try to downplay their abilities and don't feel the need to show off, whereas low scorers are much more self promoting. So, yet again, I think Dany would score incredibly high here. She's an amazing singer and guitar player. She's absolutely beautiful. She has a million things to be arrogant about, yet we've never seen her be so even once. I think it's an amazing thing to see someone be able to be confident in their abilities, but still remain genuinely humble and modest. This is virtually unheard of in a music world, but we definitely see this in Dany. And the last facet here is tender mindedness, which is linked to compassion and emotional sensitivity to others. High scorers are empathetic, caring, and emotionally attuned, whereas low scorers are typically much more analytical, detached, or tough minded in their approach. I would place Dany very high in this facet. Her emotional intelligence and her kindness are extremely evident in the way she engages so openly with her fans and the way she supports her sisters, and even just the way she speaks about the importance of connection through music. I think there's a deep sincerity in all her interactions. She seems to feel things very deeply and respond to others with genuine warmth and care, which are characteristics that keep coming up in this analysis because they are just such significant factors in her personality. Overall, I think she would not only score extremely high in agreeableness as a whole, I think she would also score the highest out of the three sisters in this trait, which is saying a lot because I would actually score each of them as being high in this trait. But I do feel that no one is going to score higher than Dany. Now, the very last trait here is neuroticism, which measures emotional stability versus emotional reactivity. High scorers tend to experience negative emotions more intensely and frequently, things like anxiety, mood swings, self doubt, or emotional vulnerability, whereas low scorers are generally more calm, resilient, and emotionally steady, even when they're under stress. Now, if you've seen any of my other analyses, you know that I usually don't like to give assessments in this factor for people in the public eye because professionally, this is an aspect that they are likely going to keep private for obvious reasons. But in Dany's case, I feel confident in saying that she would score uncommonly low or at minimum moderately low in most or even all of these traits. Now, don't get me wrong, everyone has low moments and struggles, and of course, we don't always get to see the full picture or know what's really going on behind the scenes. But Dany consistently comes across as composed, centered, and remarkably emotionally steady, even when she's obviously under pressure. Just the way she always gracefully and calmly handles mishaps in performances, the band's insane schedule and crazy touring conditions, and the seemingly never ending public interactions absolutely suggest that she has a strong sense of inner calm and self regulation, which are certainly characteristics of someone who scores low in neuroticism. And again, I'm not going to analyze the facets here one by one, but just to give you a sense of what they cover, they are anxiety, which is the tendency to feel nervous or worried, angry hostility, which is the tendency to feel frustration or irritability towards others, depression, which is not really clinical depression, but more of a tendency towards sadness, discouragement, or low mood, self consciousness, which is a sensitivity to how others perceive you, feeling easily embarrassed or awkward, immoderation, which is difficulty resisting urges or managing impulses, and vulnerability, which is how easily one feels overwhelmed or unable to cope in stressful situations. And while, of course, we can't really know what Dany experiences privately, the way she shows up with poise and warmth and what seems to be a very grounded internal confidence really suggests that she likely scores pretty low across most of these. I think we can see this almost steadiness to her that points towards emotional resilience. Definitely not the absence of emotion, but more of the ability to stay grounded through it. So, if we step back and look at the full picture, Danny comes across as someone with a rare and incredibly compelling balance of traits, just one of the most endearing human beings imaginable. Obviously, her energy and joy and confidence on stage are completely magnetic, but I actually think it's her warmth and sincerity and emotional intelligence that make her instantly likable. She really is the perfect front woman and someone that I think we would all love to have as a friend. So that is my 5 factor model analysis, but I'm curious to hear if you agree with this assessment or if there's anything you'd like to add. So please let me know in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching and for supporting these incredible artists. You can find a huge playlist on the warning in the description box if you want to dive even further. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you in the next video.